I'm Sam Roberts of the New York Times, and welcome to the New York Times Close Up. This week, we're joined by my former New York Times colleague, the acclaimed author Philip Shenon. He'll discuss his just-released book, Jesus Wept. It's an unparalleled examination of the modern Catholic Church through the lives of its last 7 popes. But first, as the city awaits a decision on whether Mayor Adams's federal corruption charges will be dropped, we continue to explore the evolving 2025 mayoral race. With the primary just 4 months away, we're joined now by one of several candidates vying to replace Mayor Adams, State Senator Zellnor Myrie of Brooklyn. Senator, you said that you're stressing competence in your campaign. You're not an ideologue, but how would you describe yourself ideologically?
Look, I think New Yorkers don't care for the labels that we've been using so much in our political rhetoric. They care primarily about 2 things. They want this city to be affordable, and they want this city to be safe. And that is what I have centered my campaign on. I'm a born and raised New Yorker. This is the city that has made me who I am today. I ride the train every day. I still have student loans. I'm recently married, trying to find a path to home ownership. And so the struggles that New Yorkers are experiencing every day are also the struggles that I'm experiencing. And I have centered the 2 priorities that I have heard overwhelmingly: a plan to make the city more affordable and a plan to keep us safe. We know that the city is less safe than what it has been in years past. We have seen from 2019 that all major categories of crime are up 30%. We've seen felony assaults up 42%, a 24-year high. We have a police headcount that is its lowest that it has been in decades. And we know the things that prevent crime have not been invested in either. So that is what I have put forward to New Yorkers, is what my focus is going to be. And we need more housing, point blank, period. We have to build more housing of all types, housing that would allow for you to raise a family here. It's the reason why my parents came here 50 years ago from Costa Rica. They both worked in factories in Brooklyn when they got here. They were able to send me to public schools in central Brooklyn. I went to Brooklyn Tech for high school, Fordham University for undergrad and grad school, ultimately Cornell Law School, and worked at one of the most prestigious law firms in the world right here in the city, Davis Polk. And that is a New York City story. But that opportunity that my parents came for is slipping away for far too many New Yorkers, and that is why I'm running to restore that opportunity.
Let's talk about those 2 things. Affordable housing, something that everyone agrees we lack. How do we define affordable in New York these days?
Well, there are a couple of categories of affordable housing. One is our rent-stabilized portfolio. I grew up in a rent-stabilized apartment, and we need more protection there. We have a good right to counsel program in the city that has not been fully funded. I want to fully fund it so that people aren't going into court or eviction proceedings without counsel. But we also have mandatory inclusionary housing that requires on newly built housing that there be a percentage of that meets the area median income, depending on how large the family is. And those percentages vary depending on the development. But the plan that I have put forward, a mandate for 1 million homes, Rebuild NYC, would include up to 200,000 of such mandatory inclusionary affordable housing units. And I also think that we need more market rate. We need mixed income because that is going to bring down the demand. We got to add more on the supply side. The average rent for a New Yorker today is close to $4,000. That's hard to afford for anybody, let alone New Yorkers who are living at the median or below the median income in this city.
How do you reconcile the fact that people don't want more density, but they do want more affordable housing?
This is why I have centered this issue in my campaign. I think we can hold both of these truths together, that we can build more, and we can build more of all types, and we can have affordable housing for those that need it. This is an incredibly great opportunity for us to have a serious conversation about housing policy and to say that we need an all of the above approach here. We also have opportunities we have not utilized, like in our NYCHA developments, that could use the revenue, that could use mixed income building so that we can give it the resources that it desperately needs. This is a portfolio that has had $70 billion in capital needs that has quintupled over the past 40 years. And everyone has identified what the problem is, but people haven't come with the bold solutions to do it. And that's what I plan to be doing as the next mayor.
You've said that police brutality is in the DNA of our country. You sued the police for brutality and actually won. Now you want more cops hired. How do you reconcile those positions?
My mom was robbed at gunpoint with me in the elevator in the building that I grew up in when I was very young. And her worldview on public safety is informed by that experience. When she sees a police officer, she feels more safe. And the data has also told us that the police presence does bring down crime. I think my mom also would tell you that she doesn't want her son getting pepper sprayed or falsely arrested. And New Yorkers are mature enough to hold both of these realities in their minds together, that we need a well-run, robust, fully accountable police force, and one that is held accountable when they step over the line. I have proposed in my public safety vision an increase for the Civilian Complaint Review Board so that they can have the requisite resources to hold police officers accountable. But the overwhelming majority of our police officers put on that uniform every single day. They walk out not knowing if they're going to return home, and their mission is to keep us safe. We got to give them the resources to do that.
Mayor Adams said that blacks who don't vote for him are betraying him. What do you think?
I think this is absurd and offensive to suggest that black voters are not sophisticated enough to judge a mayor not on the color of their skin, but on what they have delivered for the people. This city has become increasingly less affordable, increasingly less safe, and these were things that this mayor said that he was going to help us with. When he was elected, many of us, including black New Yorkers, were rooting for him. This is a second black mayor of New York City. Of course, we wanted him to succeed because his success is the city's success. But we have seen 4 police chiefs over the past 3 years. We have seen allegations and corruptions, unprecedented indictment, a Department of Justice that appears to have compromised this mayor. So this isn't about the color of his skin. This is about what he has delivered for black New Yorkers. I got into this race before the indictments because I thought he was failing us previous to this drama. I still feel that way, and that's why we put our candidacy forward.
Very quickly, a lot of candidates running, maybe half a dozen or more. How do you distinguish yourself?
I'm a born and raised New Yorker. I'm living the New York experience every day. I take the train every day. I'm not giving my policy, I'm not laying out my vision from the back of a black SUV. I'm doing it from the 5 train and the 2 train. I'm walking our streets. And what I have proposed are solutions that are bold enough to meet the scale of the problems that we face. A mandate for 1 million homes, after school for every single student and family, a public safety plan that increases our police headcount and detectives to solve every shooting. These are the things that New Yorkers are listening and caring for in this moment, and that is why I'm proposing them.
Zellnor Myrie, state senator from Brooklyn, mayoral candidate, thank you for joining us. Coming up next, we'll talk more about the mayoral campaign with Times reporters. Let's welcome New York Times political reporters Dana Rubenstein and Jeffrey Mays. They've been analyzing the increasingly crowded field of candidates in this year's mayoral race. Dana, you just said something before we went on the air that I think is rather pointed, that forget about front runners at this point in the campaign. You're going to have at least half a dozen candidates, ranked choice voting, an incumbent mayor. So how do you handicap a race like this?
Well, I don't think you have to at this point. It is early. We've got, 4 months to go. Labor is still sitting on the sidelines, and they plan to sit on the sidelines for a good month at least because they themselves are well aware. Christine Quinn, the formidable frontrunner, fell flat. There's Andrew Yang, the formidable frontrunner, fell flat. So we have Cuomo, who is leading in the polls by really significant amounts right now, but he's still not declared. And once he declares, there's going to be a revisiting of all of the reasons he left office in the first place. It's just early.
Jeffrey, what counts in an election like this? Is it union support? Is it money? Is it TV? Is it party support such as that exists anymore?
I think all of that. I think with the former governor, you see name recognition playing a big role. I think that's one of the reasons he's leading in the poll, because he has such clear name recognition. And then you have someone like a Zellnor Myrie, who no one knows who they are, right? Although people think he's a good candidate. So I think it's all going to come down to the last 6 weeks. It usually does. That's when folks will start spending a lot of money, trying to boost the name recognition. It's just too early to know what's going to happen. Cuomo's going to jump in. Adrienne Adams is likely going to be a candidate as well, the city council speaker. And who knows who else can jump in at this point. It feels totally unpredictable at this moment.
It really seems to be. Adrienne Adams, will she run? Is that likely? She has to decide pretty quickly. She is dealing with people who have had a big head start in terms of fundraising and other things. She is term limited, so arguably she has nothing to lose.
Well, I mean, Jeff has a story out on this morning. She does seem likely to jump in. That could change, but who knows? And she does have something to lose. She was planning to retire and just hang out with her grandkids and enjoy life.
You can only do so much of that.
I don't know. I wouldn't know. But if she runs, she will run as someone who has been recruited to run, much as she was recruited to be council speaker after all of the other likely front runners fell by the wayside. So, it is not an easy thing to run for mayor.
No, it certainly isn't. What does she bring to the equation other than the fact that people are asking her to run rather than her jumping in on her own?
But that's a huge thing right there. To be recruited to run shows that there is some dissatisfaction with the field. I spoke to Tish James, the Attorney General, who had been calling around, talking to folks about Adrienne. The one thing that she struck me that she said is that she's scandal-free. And if you look at our former governor, you look at our current mayor, there's ethical issues there. And no one has raised any ethical issues about Adrienne Adams so far.
Scandal-free, but can she run a city?
That remains to be seen, right? I think one of the things about being mayor is you don't know you can run a city until you actually have to run a city.
And that's been proven by other mayors before.
Many mayors. I think the thing that her council tenure shows us is that she's not afraid to sort of be collaborative, to work with people. This is the most diverse city council that we've ever had, ideological speaking. It's a female-dominated council as well. She's had to manage a lot of agendas. It's kind of like herding cats. And I think she did much better than a lot of people were expecting. Remember, she was a sort of a consolation candidate to prevent Mayor Adams from having too much control over the council.
Are we writing off Mayor Adams too quickly as a potential re-elected mayor?
I don't know that we're writing him off. I think his path to victory is exceedingly narrow, but not non-existent. He's got a lot of obstacles, which I think are readily apparent to all of us who are paying attention right now, not least of which is the uncertainty surrounding his ongoing criminal case, which has yet to be dismissed despite the best efforts of the Trump administration. And that whole saga, no matter how it plays out, is going to continue to play out in a way that produces damaging headlines for the mayor.
We're waiting to hear what the judge does. If the judge says, okay, we'll dismiss the charges with prejudice, meaning they could not be brought again, and therefore the Trump administration would not have the same leverage over the mayor, arguably, would that make a difference, Jeff?
I think the irony of this whole process where the mayor has had the charges dismissed is that I think there was a thought that this would allow him to move on. This would allow him to get back to running the city, to focusing on re-election. And in fact, it's done the complete opposite, because people believe there is a sort of quid pro quo there where he does have to cooperate with President Trump in order to get these charges dismissed. Even if they are dismissed with prejudice, I think the stain is already there. A lot of people have questioned, what have you done to actually get these charges dismissed?
Or what would you do?
Or what would you do? So I think that once that question is raised, it's really hard to sort of pull that back.
Is there a big gap between what Mayor Adams has accomplished and the perception of what he's accomplished? Has he been that bad a mayor?
That's a good question. I mean, I think what you've seen during his mayoralty is that, there has been some decline in major crimes in keeping with national trends, but we're still above the pre-pandemic
He finally appointed a good police commissioner.
Yeah, your words. I think,
Arguably, I would add to that, if you insist.
she's definitely gotten rid of a lot of the loyalists that he installed at PD, although not all of them, and who were causing so much turmoil there. And she's thought of as someone who is not, ethically compromised. He has, he did the City of Yes, which could create up to 80,000 units of housing, which is something. So, he has some accomplishments under his belt. I think he would argue that there's a huge perception gap. I'm not sure that other people would argue that. I guess it depends on, your particular biases. But certainly his tenure has been marked by just an enormous amount of scandal. I think it was the Citizens Union did an analysis, and they have an actual analysis showing that the numbers of aides and deputy mayors who have resigned and disgraced or under investigation or after their phones were seized, it's like, I don't remember the exact, but it's many multiples the prior mayoralties combined. So, that will definitely be a big part of his legacy.
The mayor says that blacks who don't vote for him would be betraying him. Is that argument going to wash?
At this point, the mayor has, I think, lost some support among the black community. When he came in at first, people were a little hesitant to criticize him, just under the belief that sometimes black executives are treated to a different standard. That has gone out the window, especially with the news of this sort of dismissal of the indictment and whether he has a quid pro quo with President Trump. You've heard everyone from Adrienne Adams criticize him, Hakeem Jeffries. Al Sharpton, the faith-based community, is amongst his strongest supporters. So I think that argument has lost a lot of power with the mayor, and I think black leaders are criticizing him as much as any other leaders.
Dana, what's the likelihood that ranked choice voting will make a difference in this election, this primary in June?
100%. I mean, it's a totally different system of tallying the votes, and there's a strong likelihood that the liberal candidates will, in some fashion, form a coalition. And I think that's the hope.
They really will get together?
I mean, that is the hope amongst progressives and the left, that they don't have a repeat of 2021 when they were disorganized and couldn't get it together and weren't able to push their favorite candidate to the mayoralty. And I think there is a belief that they have perhaps learned their lesson and will, urge their supporters to rank their competitors who are politically aligned on the ballot. So I think that, it's likely to play a big role.
This is a totally unfair question, but I'll ask you anyway. Who are they most likely to get behind? Who is the most acceptable candidate to progressives at this point?
Yeah, I don't know. Do you know? Yeah, I don't know.
Smart.
No, I think it's still too early to tell. I think Mamdani has been doing a very interesting job. He's raised his profile. He's used social media very effective. Some recent polls, he's been listed as second among the candidates. So he's a very interesting candidate, but I think it's still too early to say which of them will rise to the top.
That certainly makes sense. And what about money? Is that going to make a big difference? Obviously, Andrew Cuomo at this point seems to have the most, including some amount left over from his gubernatorial race.
Yeah, but it's not clear that he can transfer that to the city race. He actually has to raise a ton of money in the next 4 months. There's a very high likelihood he'll be able to. He also, we reported yesterday, his allies launched a super PAC to support his bid that aims to raise up to $15 million, which is a huge amount in a city race. Money will be an issue for Adrienne Adams, who has done no fundraising for the mayor's race yet. But, I think she's got a good amount of support among certain sectors in the city. So we'll have to see how it plays out.
You've just heard from two experts, Dana Rubenstein, Jeffrey Mayes of the New York Times. Coming up next, the author Phil Shenon on the defining struggles of the modern Catholic Church, his book, Jesus Wept. My former New York Times colleague, Philip Shenon, joins us now to discuss his provocative and very timely new book, Jesus Wept, Seven Popes and the Battle for the Soul of the Catholic Church. The book explores the papacy and the Catholic Church's contemporary challenges. Phil, 2,000 years later, is Jesus still weeping?
I fear he is, and those tears are justified because, this hierarchy that exists in Rome, it so often betrayed the legacy of Jesus Christ and the message of the Gospels.
In what way? And what way now?
Well, certainly for the last several decades, the church has been convulsed by these terrible child abuse scandals, which are actually far worse than I really understood going into this project. And there's so much other reform of the church that's been called for over the last century, sort of common sense reforms that popes have just been insistent they won't enact. And I think a lot of Catholics, and especially Catholic women who have no real power in the church, have reason to be very frustrated with what the papacy has become.
John 23rd is a hero in your book, probably the only hero. You say Pope Francis you're kind of disappointed with.
Well, Pope Francis came to power in 2013, and it appeared he was going to be a revolutionary along the lines of John the 23rd. John the 23rd, the architect of Vatican II. But Francis has proved to be much more cautious than I think people had hoped for. And certainly he has himself been tied up in these child abuse scandals. He hasn't done nearly enough to deal with that problem.
Based on his record, based on where the church stands today, what does that say about the next pope?
Well, I think Francis has been cautious in a way his successor may not be. Francis has stacked the College of Cardinals, the men who will choose his successor. 80% of the men who are in the college now are people put there by Francis. And I think, there's been a lot of talk about how conservatives might try to take control of the church. Well, that's going to be difficult if 80% of the men in the college are loyal to Francis's agenda. And it's possible the next pope may adopt Francis's sort of reform-minded agenda and feel much more empowered to act on it.
Phil, if John the 23rd is a hero in this book, is Pope Pius XII the villain?
Well, I think, in recent years, Pope Francis opened up the World War II archives about Pius XII, the Pope of World War II. And the evidence gets worse and worse and worse. It's clear that Pius had incontrovertible evidence of the Holocaust and really said nothing in public about it. The man who holds him out to be the moral leader of not just Christendom, but of all the world, silent about these grotesque atrocities occurring not that far away from Rome, I think that's inexcusable.
Although you say he liked Germany more than Italy.
He did. He was, as Cardinal Pacelli, before he became Pius XII, he was in Germany for a dozen years as a Vatican diplomat, first in Bavaria, then in Berlin. And I think the record shows that he really loved Germany more than he loved Italy. And that love for Germany, I think the people around Pius certainly believed influenced his decision-making as Pope and helps explain why he refused to speak out to protest the Holocaust.
Phil, in Jesus Wept, the book, you talk about an astounding document from Cardinal O'Connor of New York. What did that say?
The single most shocking document I found in all these years of research was a letter written in 1999 by Cardinal O'Connor, who was then the most powerful churchman in America, to Pope John Paul II. And to back up a little bit, O'Connor had just undergone brain surgery. He suspected he had only weeks to live. And this letter is one of his final acts on this earth. And he writes to John Paul II to tell him that he must not promote Archbishop Theodore McCarrick, who was then in Newark, that he must not be promoted to any higher post in the church because of the well-known reports that McCarrick was a sexual predator, that he was preying on young men and boys. And despite that, and despite warnings from lots of John Paul's deputies in Rome, John Paul promotes McCarrick to the College of Cardinals and makes him Archbishop of Washington, D.C., and McCarrick would go on for years to continue to molest young men and boys.
Pretty amazing that you found that letter. How do you research a book on the Vatican? There are few institutions more secretive than that.
Yes and no. One thing about churchmen is that because they don't have wives and kids to go home to, they tend to write a lot. So you can find a lot of, memoirs and journals and other paperwork that's out there that people haven't really explored. There's so much of it that I think researchers haven't properly gone into the records that have been available to us over the last 50 years about, the history of the Vatican. In the case of Cardinal O'Connor's letter, that was divulged by the Vatican. They were forced to divulge it in the wake of the many investigations of McCarrick's crimes.
The New York Times book review, which was enormously favorable, said the word sex or its derivative appears something like 400 times in the 500 pages of the book. Is the Vatican, the church, now all about sex?
Well, for the last for the last 50 years, for centuries, there has been this fixation on sexual sin by the Vatican. Pope Francis often says that he considers sexual sin the least sin. The sins of the flesh are the least that the church should be worried about. But certainly for many of his predecessors, certainly for John Paul II and for Benedict, there had been this fixation on the evils of sexual sin. The issue of sex comes up a lot in my book, but I didn't really have a choice because that has been the issue that the church has obsessed about for all the time period I'm writing about.
And one of the reasons you talk about this is because of the insistence on celibacy for priests who are in short supply.
This history is something I wasn't aware of until I got into this book. But, the doctrine of priestly celibacy, the idea that priests can't marry, can't have kids, can't have sex, is not something that existed in the first 1,000 years of the history of the church. For 1,000 years after the crucifixion, priests could get married, they could have kids, they could know, the comfort and the chaos of a family. In the 11th century, a pope by the name of Gregory decreed that from that moment on, priests and bishops could not marry, could not have families, and that is where the doctrine comes from. It's not something that existed in the early history of the church, and there's been a hope on the part of many priests, on the part of many Catholics, that the church will reverse that doctrine and allow priests to marry, and it's a matter of church law, not eternal dogma. Any pope can lift the doctrine with a snap of his fingers.
Philip, one quick last question. If we talk about papal infallibility, how can popes change their mind on issues like that?
It's an excellent question. And one of the reasons that I think popes have held firm to traditional doctrine is to reverse that doctrine would be an admission that your predecessors had made a mistake. One thing about papal infallibility, it's not an ancient dogma. It is something that was only the idea of papal infallibility, the doctrine of papal infallibility only dates back to 1870. This is not something that existed for most of the first 2,000 years of the history of the church.
Philip Shenon, my former colleague at the New York Times, his latest book, Jesus Wept, 7 Popes and the Battle for the Soul of the Catholic Church. That's it for this edition of the New York Times Close Up. And for the New York Times and CUNY TV, I'm Sam Roberts. Don't forget to download the CUNY TV app. You can catch our weekly program on the go, anytime, anywhere.